everyone, but I can't see you, so hopefully everyone is participating and paying a little bit of attention to the screen. I will do my disclaimer first and foremost to tell you that I am not an expert by any means. So I'm sure, as is normally the case, that there are a number of experts who know more than I do by the time I end up doing these presentations. So I'm hoping that we can have a little bit of a chat at the end, and I'm sure that I will learn as much from you as hopefully you learn a little bit from me today. So I'm going to go on and do my presentation. I won't monitor the chat while I'm doing it because I can only do a couple of things at one time. So I'm going to start with the tale of the tulip, and it is certainly my favorite spring flower. I am a lifelong gardener, and I do say lifelong because I think I started gardening with my grandmother probably when I was 3 years old, and I have just started gardening with my granddaughter as well, who is now 2.5. So I figured we'll start her early. So this is about the tale of the tulip, and it's a favorite spring flower. The most basic information is, what is a tulip? I mean, the tulip is a member of the lily family. So it shares a lot of the same characteristics of lilies. It is a bulb, which grows roots over the winter, which is why everyone tries to get their tulips in the fall so that they can set root. They send up shoots which flower in spring, and they can start as early as March up here and go through May, and uses its leaves to store nutrients in its bulbs over summer. So one of the debates is always, do you dig these up? Do you leave them? What the gardeners in the Netherlands do is take the heads off and leave the plant so that it can set nutrients through its leaves throughout the year. Go through a number of different types of tulips for anyone who's planted them. It can get confusing from time to time because there's so many different ways of categorizing. So I'm going to go through a couple of ways throughout this presentation. Standard tulips are the traditional, I think of them as the old-fashioned tulips, available in many forms and shades, either single or bicolor. This one happens to have a little bit of coloration on the petal here. Standard tulips are easy to find and truly are relatively inexpensive at this point. Parrot tulips are long stem tulips distinctive for fringed, very feathery, ruffled, twisted, or curled petals in a variety of vibrant colors. Of the tulips, these are probably my favorites. Fringed tulips, fringed as the name suggests, have little fringes along the edges of the petals. The bloom's soft, frilly appearance. Colors include pink, red, violet, yellow, white, with the fringe often contrasting the bloom. These are a little bit harder to find, although many of the catalogs do have them available at this point. Rembrandt tulips are showy, tall tulips with pale colors distinctly variegated or streaked by definition, with deep purple or reddish flames. As you can see, the colorations, they're always bicolored in one shape or form, and they have these flaming extensions within the petals. Wild tulips. Wild tulips are now being sold as a variety by many bulb dealers. They liken back to the very first indigenous tulips found in Eurasia. You can see they're kind of spindly, they're much smaller in terms of their petals, and they are very beautiful, and they look like they should be in fields, quite frankly. These are not the type of tulips that you typically put in beds. They're more field and naturalizers. Okay. So I want to stop right now going through the categorization of the tulips and maybe talk a little bit about the history of the tulip. So tulips go back pretty much to the 13th century. They were grown in the gardens of the Persian court, which we think of today as Iran. right? As far back as the 13th century, the conquering Ottoman Turks took the tulips and the gardeners back to Turkey with them. Because when you are a conquering army, that's what you do. You take stuff from other places and take them back with you. So Turks come in to take the Persian tulips from their gardens and take them back to Turkey. You can see here, these are some of the tapestries, and some of the very first ideas of putting tulips into kind of tapestries, and you can see that they are beginning to be used and are common there. Europeans discovered the tulips. The Austrian ambassador to the Ottoman court in 1554 saw the tulips. They're called tulipim by the Turks. When he visited there, he sent the bulbs and seeds back to Vienna, where Carolus Clusius was introduced to them. So Carolus at that point was studying, I believe, in Vienna, and he was part of the interface when the Austrian ambassador began sending stuff back from Turkey. So Carolus, he's a Dutchman who became professor at the University of Leiden after his work with the ambassador, and became director of the city's new botanical gardens. These are the gardens in Leiden. His cultivation of tulips in the gardens laid the foundation for the Dutch tulip industry. He was a botanist, so he did study the tulips, and he did do a lot of work, I think crossbreeding and working on tulips in general. His cultivation of tulips in the gardens laid the foundation for the Dutch tulip industry, as I had just said. His observation on tulips breaking, called, quote, breaking, the virus causing Rembrandt tulips and feathered varieties helped to flame tulip mania of the 1630s. So when the virus infected the tulips, it caused changes in the tulip petals, and the tulip petals began to look like they had flames, thereby creating the quote, quote, Rembrandt tulip. Those were by far the most coveted and the most expensive of the tulips because they were unique. The botanist Carolus became famous for growing these tulips in the gardens in Leiden and Holland. Specimens were propagated and sold across Holland. Supposedly some were stolen out of gardens as well, and soon became part of the horticulture industry there. So there was this absolute rage of trying to get a different type of tulip. It didn't last extremely long, but when it was there, it was causing a lot of publicity, if you would, and a lot of information about the tulips. Tulip mania, as it was called. The tulips bloomed in Holland and soon became fashionable across Europe. So the Europeans accepted tulips quickly. It's interesting to note that the latitude at which tulips grow, they don't grow very close to the equator. So Europe was particularly suited for growing tulips. Some of the higher elevations don't work as well. So there is a band where tulips grow very, very well. And the Europeans absolutely love them. They became a national obsession in 1636. At the height of tulip mania, one single bulb sold for 2,500 florins. I have no idea what a florin is worth, but a florin is enough, apparently, to 2,500 florins would buy 12 sheep, 1,000 pounds of cheese, 4 barrels of beer, and a bed. So the tulips were pretty pricey, I would think. Tulips with the streaked effect, as we talked before, by a second color, sometimes called Rembrandt tulips, were highly prized. They are found to be spread by a virus transported by aphids, and they replaced by virus-free varieties in the 20th century. Rembrandts became extremely popular and are popular to this day. One of the things with the tulip mania that is relatively unique, the Holland Land Company was created an entire category of very wealthy merchants in Holland and Amsterdam at that time. So the ability for people to have gardens and buy these type of luxury items was pretty prolific. So it was tulip mania was not only fueled by the uniqueness of the tulips, but by the availability of the money that was in the community at that time. I want to tell you that nature and art often go together. And this is part of Tulips of the Great Masters. I just had to pull a couple of those because the Dutch masters are also some of my favorites. Rubens, many others depicted tulips in their paintings. The Holland connection made these flowers plentiful as well as beautiful subjects. So the fact that you were in the center of the bulb industry and the gardening industry there gave you this plethora of subjects to work from, and you can see tulips being very, very common in some of these paintings. So Rembrandt was part of the Dutch golden age as well. He was a painter born in 1606 in Leiden, again, the same place where Carolus was working, and later spent much of his time in Amsterdam. So Rembrandt and the Rembrandt tulip are linked for a lot of reasons. Not only his paintings, but because he was part of the art scene and part of the tulip age, if you will, as part of the tulip mania. So as I had indicated to you, those who could afford the art, not only do you have the Dutch masters producing, you have the Dutch gardeners producing. The Dutch East India Company ushered in a wave of very wealthy merchants who could afford the art, moving it out of the salons of the royalty into the merchant class. And this is one of those places and times where things break in a certain way, and certainly the proliferation of the Dutch masters is running parallel with this affordability and this proliferation of these new flowers. I wanted to show you yet another one. This is a new one. Hans Bollinger, I am not really aware of, but you can see these Rembrandt tulips, which are just stunning in this painting. Again, all around that 1636, 1639 era. So obviously we know about the Dutch and tulips. I'm gonna go over just a little bit and talk about tulips in America. So George Washington and Thomas Jefferson also grew tulips. I mean, they were very, very good gardeners. They were researchers. They were scientists in their own right. More Thomas Jefferson than George Washington, I think. But certainly, if you've ever been to Monticello, you can see Thomas Jefferson categorizing and keeping very prolific notes about his garden. And certainly tulips were a part of that. The Pennsylvania Dutch used tulips as a favorite motif in their handcrafted and domestic objects. You can see that in all kinds of places, and I just have a couple examples. You see the tulips here. There's 3 tulips on the top. Colonists brought precious cargo with them on their voyages to the New World. And among the items were tulip bulbs. As early as 1645, tulips were blooming in tiny gardens in New Amsterdam, now New York City. I had to check that date because I went, did you get that right, Marianne? Yes, New Amsterdam was actually founded by the the Dutch West India Company in 1624. So just about 20 years later was enough time for people to have homes and gardens and tulips. Interesting enough that those were some of the very first things that were brought to the table. I'm going to try using my little marker here and see if I can actually get the laser pointer to work. In case you haven't seen it, this is what I was talking about in terms of the tulips, upright tulips, and then a couple that have bent over in this motif. So let me see if there are a number of tulip festivals in the United States. I just caught a couple of them this morning. Holland, Michigan, Mount Vernon, Washington, Oregon, Albany, New York. All of these tend to be the more northern states. Again, tulips don't do well in a lot of heat, so you're not going to see them a lot in the south. And if you have relatives or friends or people who have moved south, one of the things that I'm told they missed most is the proliferation of tulips and the ability to have that show in a spring garden. If they're able to do tulips at all, it's usually extremely early in the season. I mean, we're talking, January, February, March, rather than, March, April, May. And it's very short-lived. So I guess you got to live north if you want tulips. Okay, tulips. So you got that, Dominic. Okay, they're popular today as when they were with the founding fathers, planted them in gardens. As I said, there's a number of spring gardens and big garden festivals across the country. Tulips is a favorite design element. They seem to lend themselves to being simple but beautiful, that whole category of elegance that comes along with it. Vases, this whole idea of the shape of the tulip and the inlaid tulips within this vase. The shape, these are called tulip goblets, I believe. Favorite objects, favorite subjects, just today as they were 100 years ago. Very popular in fabric. If you're a quilter like I am, you find tulips fabrics in the spring. They are never out of style. Never, 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 never. You find them in upholstery, you find them in dresses, you find them in quilting fabrics. They always are around. Tulip tips, a couple of really kind of quick items. Do not mix tulips and daffodils. I didn't know that till a few years ago. Apparently daffodils emit ethylene, and they kind of create a slime from their stems, which kills the poor tulips. So if you want beautiful tulips, the suggestion is to mix yellow tulips in to kind of replace the idea of having daffodils, and they will be much more long-lasting. If anybody else knows of that, just confirm that for me. Cut tulips last longest when kept in a cool room, but scented varieties need some warmth to bring out their fragrance. There's also another tidbit that came from someone who was a gardener and a florist, and I can tell you that this works. If you add a penny to the vase, it will help the stems stay strong. They won't droop as much. They will stand strong. And they will tend to last longer because they are able to drink more water. So just a penny, nothing special. Just put a penny in the bottom of the base, and it's amazing to watch the difference. I don't know if it's the copper content or the zinc. One of the metals certainly does help it stay strong. Okay. Let's go back to our favorite tulips again and talk about a little bit more about types of tulip, shapes of flowers. I find that this can be a little overwhelming after a while. So it's not so much trying to categorize them as to try to pick what you like, I think, at some point. You can talk about tulips and categorize them as singles or doubles. I mean, there's all kinds. There's some now that look like roses. There's some that look like, multiple layers of ice cream cone kind of things. There's singles, there's doubles, there's stars. These are kind of stars. Peony tulips, they look more like peonies than they do like tulips. They bloom earlier, so you can get that sequential kind of blooming. So in using this kind of categorization, you are looking at the shape of the flower and categorizing according to that. More classifications by bloom time. This is really important if you want to plan your garden. Early season tulips here are in March, mid-season are in April, and late season are in May. So whenever you're looking at a catalog or whenever you're looking to purchase tulips, if you're going to buy 3 bags of tulips, buy one for early season, one for mid-season, and one for late season. And it gives you the opportunity to kind of get surprised a little bit and try different types of tulips over the different months of bloom. Tulips are a lot of fun because there's so many of different kinds and so much you can do. One of my favorite things is always to decide what color combinations we're going to use for next year because it typically changes in my garden anyway. Oh, you can also define tulips by height. So they can be tall, they can be short, they can be single stem, they can be multi-stem. The multi-stem tulips seem to have proliferated over the past few years and becoming very, very popular. Tall and short is an important distinction. At one point, I had purchased some tall tulips that were almost 2 feet tall. They were just amazingly large and incredible. So they are out there, and they do give you a tremendous amount of variety and choice again. Number of stems, we talked about singles and multiples. This literally has 3 or 4 tulips coming out of one stem. It was a very, very good example of a multi-stemmed tulip. Giving tulips. This is something I did not know until recently. When tulips are given in the Netherlands, they are given in profusion. It may be because they grow them. So, an unwritten social rule holds that giving anything less than 10 tulips is considered miserly. So if you're showing up at somebody's house, you should always have at least a dozen tulips with you. They do absolutely come in this kind of groupings. If you're in the Netherlands, the flower markets are, amazing. And in Amsterdam, particularly, there's all kinds of street level flower markets. So you can see why people would be giving this many tulips. I just thought that was a fun fact. Let me tell you a little bit about the Dutch tulip industry. Not a lot of time here, but a little. Look at these, sitting here. Amazing. 90% of tulips are grown and exported from the Netherlands. It's interesting. I have not really had a lot of time to spend understanding the total history of the immersion of this industry, but I have a feeling it came about at the same time that the Dutch were reclaiming a lot of the land, using their windmills and trying to become more agrarian. I mean, they were looking for things to plant. And I think the tulip mania came at the same time that they were reclaiming land. And there was a niche market. And the Dutch India Company was a very, very well-oiled machine. So they, I think, very quickly realized that there was a niche market here and nobody else was producing. So the ability to have a very unique product out in the European marketplace and then very quickly the worldwide marketplace, because they were a international, multi-continent kind of entity that the industry grew because of the convergence of all of those factors. And besides that, I want it to be my excuse for going to spend a month in the Netherlands trying to figure out the Dutch tulip industry. If I tell them I'm a researcher, maybe they'll let me stay. The Dutch tulip industry, 11.4 billion with a B flowers were traded in the Netherlands in 2020. The industry is worth 7.2 billion in US dollars. This is a picture of the market exchange, the flower market exchange in Amsterdam. Excuse me. If you've had the opportunity to go and watch this happen, it is truly amazing. I believe there are only 2 places in the world where this happens. I think there is one place in South America and one place in the Netherlands where this many flowers get exchanged every day. Not 11 billion, but carts and carts and carts full of flowers. It is a remarkable process. Visiting the Netherlands and Keukenhof Gardens. If you ever have the opportunity to do this, I strongly recommend it if you are a gardener. It's truly an amazing sight. Keukenhof is the Dutch word for kitchen garden. So at some point, this was an estate, and obviously they had a beautiful kitchen garden, and someone decided to name it Keukenhof. It's really that simple. It's only open 8 weeks to the public from April to May. So if you want to see Keukenhof, you have to go from April to May. You can imagine what that means in terms of visitors, because gardening is a worldwide thing. So 1.5 million people visit the gardens, and it can be up to 26,000 in a day. I've been there multiple times. We did go there the last time, and we got there early, so we were there before the crowds came in, and it is spectacular. It does get very, very crowded, so I strongly suggest if you're going to do that and you can get on an early tour, please do that because it will make all the difference in the world. Weather is weather. It also rained the day that we were there, so you don't get your choice of whether it's going to be rainy or not, but it's worth it in any weather. Castle Keukenhof, this is the building, manor house. It was originally 15th century hunting grounds. I don't know which of the queens owned it or which one of the dukes, I don't recall. It was bought by the Dutch East India Company. And in 1641, they had an estate built there, which is this. The manor house was named Castle Keukenhof, with the Keukenhof Garden. Get one. These are some of the tulips in the gardens. I just wanted to show you some of the pictures. They are spectacular. I don't remember exactly how many tulips are produced. There's like 50 million tulips planted here or something. There are 50 different gardeners, producers. There are 50 different wholesalers of tulips who put together a cooperative and supply the tulips for this garden and use it as a showcase for their new tulip varieties. So there's a lot of business underneath these gardens. They do have 20 gardeners working full time. I think they start planting, I believe it's in November, and then they finish right around December 5th. Maybe it's October. I think it may be October. So they're planting, they plant them differently every year, as I think someone has already commented. They are truly, truly an amazing sight. There's a thing about tulips that will make you cry. This is just a couple of other pictures of when we were in Amsterdam. And yes, there are truly swans, which is a whole nother subject of Hans Christian Andersen and how his stories came about. The tulip fields are just as spectacular, and this is a grower. And the problem is that right before these tulips are in full bloom, they will bring a tractor off and cut off the heads of all of the tulips. So if you want to watch a group of gardeners just sit there and cry and, just be astounded that someone's going to do this, they literally take a tractor and cut the heads off. Because remember, their intention is to have the biggest bulbs possible. So they're getting rid of the tulip heads with the intention of having the leaves store as much of the nutrients and get as big a bulb as possible so that they can then sell them at a premium price. This is This is the Netherlands in full bloom, and it's even spectacular from the air. This is Keukenhof Gardens, again, variety after variety after layer. And you can just wander for hours, and the picture taking is fantastic until it gets crowded, and then you can't take pictures anymore because there's just too many people. And again, I just keep taking them now because they're absolutely astounding. You can't take enough pictures. And you can see here again, different kind of tulip. Some of these are just very simple tulips. These are the original standard tulips. These are different varieties of other types of bulbs. And then you have these taller tulips. So you could actually literally go through and kind of analyze the types of tulips. And they do showcase some of their newer bulbs and some of their new varieties. And more yet again. These are a whole set of different colors, and it just goes on and on and on. It is absolutely extraordinary. And really, this is the presentation. So I've taken about 35 minutes. Again, these are bicolor tulips, and yes, this is a photo. There's more here, there's more here. It's just amazing to have the opportunity to do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sure we can just chit chat for a while. I'll see if I can get into chat. Let me see if I can turn this thing off. So I can get these are
You know what, Marianne, if it's easier, I can read you the chat.
Yeah, why don't you do that? That's fine.
We had a question from Jim. He said, you mentioned the Holland Land Company. Is this related to Western New York? The
Sure.
land my house sits on was once part of the Holland Land Company based in Batavia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Their reach is far and wide. The Holland Land Company, yes, absolutely. They sent out a number of surveyors, and again, New Amsterdam, we have a very long history in New York, particularly of having the Dutch come in and do ownership here. So yes, it's this one and the same kind of Holland Land Company.
Awesome. And then I wanted to mention Commissioner Angela popped in, and she was watching a bit of your class, and she wanted to let everyone know that she was lucky enough to go to Amsterdam and view the tulips in person, and that she brought back bulbs that were wrapped so you could safely transport through customs. You know, because I know we have someone that's traveling, so that was a good bit of
If
info.
if you are a gardener, what they do have is they do have the ability to ship right from there, and
Oh,
many of the marketplaces will also ship for you. So yes, you absolutely can get bulbs from Holland.
wonderful. Also, a question from one of our staff. They want your thoughts on where is the best place to purchase bulbs to plant.
There really is no best place. I think it all depends on how sophisticated a gardener you are. I mean, tulip bulbs last probably 5 years unless you're really going to cultivate them. You can get, 3 to 4 good years. What you have to know about tulips is they grow deeper. So every year it'll set another bulb and set another bulb, and sooner or later they'll be too deep, or the squirrels will get them, or we have a lot of animals that happen to love tulips like deer. So your chances of keeping them are kind of 50-50 sometimes. So I happen to like, I mean, I'll go over to Home Depot. I can go to Lowe's. You can go to any garden store and pick up a lot of bulbs relatively inexpensively. And then you can go to any of the catalogs and get some really sophisticated and beautiful bulbs. You know, they, Urban Roots has a beautiful variety of them. I mean, any of the garden centers will have them. And then you can go to the catalogs and they'll have even more specialized. It all depends how much care you want to give them. Because when you start spending, multiple dollars for a tulip, you know, I just have recognized that I'm going to lose to the squirrels. So, I, I sometimes go for quantity rather than quality, but it all depends
Now,
what you.
I was going to say, I'm sorry for interrupting. All of those bulbs, those beautiful different variations that you showed us pictures, are they all can they all be grown in Western New York?
Absolutely.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Okay, like the Rembrandt tulips and the fringed ones.
Absolutely. Well, Western New York is a great place to grow tulips. We have, that wet weather that we have early in the season is exactly what they need. And it's cool. And that's exactly what they want. So yes, yes, yes. We've
Awesome.
been
So
super.
does anyone have any questions they want to send through the chat for Marianne? Um, we'll leave it open for a few more minutes.
She has a large barrel and can you plant them in it? Yes, yes. I've actually taken to planting a lot of my bulbs in pots. If you're gonna put them in pots, you can do one of two things. You can put them in your garage to keep the critters away from them, or you can keep them in your yard and put a screen over them. So that they don't get, because the squirrels will just love to, they'll dig in them and they'll move them and the skunks will come and eat them. It's crazy. So, you really want to protect them. But yes, putting them in pots is great. And then you can move them around in the garden too. So I've done that multiple times. You're
anyone
sharing your
else?
screen, enter exit. What am I doing here?
No,
Oh, okay.
we're getting a lot of thank yous, Marianne. It was a wonderful presentation. I think we've answered all the questions. Um, anyone else? No, a lot
I
of
guess
thank yous
I
for
have a
you.
question for everyone. Is there anything new that you didn't know? Because I always like to know what I sometimes go to multiple sources to try and find different things. So did I tell anybody anything that they already didn't know?
Your whole presentation for me. I love looking at tulips. I knew nothing about like the history and all of that. So the penny idea was great. They didn't know, someone didn't know about not using daffodils. Love the container idea. Um,
Excellent.
so yeah, that's great. That's really what University Express is all about, learning new things. So it looks like we were very successful with that today.
Yeah, the penny idea is awesome. Try it. It's amazing. It's like, how does this work? So
Sad to know the deer are just going to eat them. Is there anything we can put on our gardens to prevent that?
you can spray, you can do all kinds of stuff. There's deer spray, but the easiest thing to do is just to put a little bit of a grate above them. But yeah, then once they start coming up, they come at a time when the deer are really hungry. So the deer, you know, they're like salad to them. So
Well, they are beautiful.
they are beautiful.
Okay, Marianne, do you have a moment to stick around after
Sure.
with me? We're gonna end the recording now. Everyone, thank you so much for your
Thank
participation
you.
today. You will be getting a survey afterwards, and we would be happy to share with Marianne all of your comments. So please take a moment to fill that out if you wouldn't mind. And we hope to see you again at another University Express class. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.